Well, here I am on the steps of Town Hall in Sydney, Australia, and if there's one question you could ask more than any other, more even than, do pilots take crash courses? That question would have to be, Mark, why the hell did you bring a camera like a Bronica S2 all the way to a place like Sydney? I mean, it's not exactly a travel camera, is it? Well, the short answer is, I don't know, but I think there's a bit more to it. And today, we're going to try and answer that question. And look, obviously, I was not the only person here thought this was a pretty cool location. That guy there has taken the same view, only I don't have any friends to take photos of. So this is how I'm composing my shot. And of course, since it's a medium format SLR, whichever way you move, you actually get the opposite happening in the viewfinder, which is a little bit kind of frustrating, but you do get used to it. I want to keep some of the old and some of the new. Maybe something a bit like that, let's see. Get a little bit higher, keep a bit more of the lamppost. Okay, let's try and take a little bit more. Is that a photo even? Oh wow, actually, surprisingly like the frame within a frame. I like the people down, and I also like the reflection of the people crossing the street. Is that a photo? You know what the problem is? Everything just looks amazing through this viewfinder. When you've got enough light and you've got a bit of shade to shade the viewfinder, it just looks amazing. Not a beautiful shot, but to me quite an interesting shot. This certainly does seem to represent something about the modernity of Sydney. This is why you should never photograph during the middle of the day. With bad light, haze in the distance, harsh shadows. Ugly, ugly, ugly. Alright, for this one, I will focus on the guy. I'll try and keep the Australian flag in because, hey, we're in Australia, mate. Got to capture that Australian character. Yes, the Bronica S2 as a street photography camera. It does seem kind of counterintuitive. After all, now that I can rely on Google Gemini and not actually do any thinking for myself anymore, a simple search tells me that the ideal street photography camera should be compact and lightweight, have a silent shutter, fast autofocus, weather resistance, and an articulating screen to capture those candid moments quickly. How does the Bronica S2 match up? Well, the Bronica S2
is one of a line of medium format single lens reflex cameras, or SLRs, produced in the 1960s and really had a reputation for being a Japanese Hasselblad or a poor man's Blad, depending on who you were speaking to. One thing it is not is compact. Don't get me wrong, it's not a Fujifilm GX680. In fact, compared to most medium format cameras, the Bronica is probably one of the smaller ones. But light this is not. Checking in at 1.78 kilos. That's a hefty chunk of your carry-on luggage, and I know because I had to do without underpants for 3 days. The fact is, this just isn't a camera that you can slip into your pocket and pull out and surprise people at parties. I mean, people will be surprised, but probably more curious why you're rummaging so deeply inside your pants, particularly since you didn't even have room to pack those underpants. It's not what you'd call discreet. It is a rather dense and beautiful block of metal though. I'm assuming most of that 1.78 kilos is brass, and the S2 does feel very rugged. Despite this particular variant does have a reputation for having its gears stripped by over-enthusiastic photographers winding their film on, so it was replaced a bit later by the S2A that was otherwise identical, other than a more robust film transport mechanism. I think for most of us that aren't professional event or wedding photographers, we're not abusing our precious antiques in the same way, so I'm not worrying too much about it failing on me. It's actually a very well-spec'd device when you think about it. It has shutter speeds going from a second to 1,000th of a second, as well as a bulb mode for long exposures. And it's a modular system, so you have interchangeable viewfinders, and you can replace the film backs as well as the lenses, of course. So all of this makes for quite a sophisticated system, definitely good enough to rival the Hasselblad. Or is it? Look, this does have a few definite compromises compared to its more favoured European cousin. Perhaps the one that isn't so obvious on the outside but becomes immediately apparent when you use it is that while the Hasselblad makes use of a leaf shutter on the lens, this one has a more traditional cloth focal plane shutter. Basically the same technology found in your 1930s Leica. Hey, it works, but it does mean that you're stuck with a 40th of a second flash sync speed. Not something I've really noticed since I don't have anywhere to attach a flash anyway, and this is far too heavy to hold one-handed. The biggest issue with the Bronica's shutter is that it is loud. Louder even than the voices in my head that tell me this is a ridiculously impractical tool for street photography. But seriously, the clunk of the shutter is the percussion to a very awkward symphony on the street. Silent? Definitely not. And don't worry, even if you don't get noticed when you actually take the shot, I promise you the wind-on mechanism provides a clatterous finale to the whole experience when you prepare to take the next one. Just for the purposes of disambiguation, no, this doesn't autofocus. And no, this doesn't have weather sealing or an articulating screen for that matter, but I'll wager Robert Frank wasn't using the selfie mode on his Leica 3 when he was capturing mid-century America. And no, there is no built-in light meter either. This is a purely mechanical camera. What the Bronica does have is an amazing lens. The Nikon 75mm f2.8, and in this sense it does meet the AI street photography criteria of a small bright lens. f2.8 is not a wide aperture by most standards, but is very wide for a medium format lens, and its size is comparatively tiny. Since the shutter is built into the camera and it even has a separate helicoid to do the focusing, most Bronica lenses are basically just a lump of glass. That keeps both the size and the cost down, and you know that appeals to me. But am I just trying to convince myself here that this will work for street photography? Is it a logical fallacy to assume that something that is smaller and cheaper than the Hasselblad is going to be a great street tool? But maybe that is a fallacy, and I'm just enough of a phallus to fall for that. Regardless, I was just one roll down, and I'd barely broken the surface of Darling Harbour. Time to switch out from the bright summer colours of Lomo 100 to the sharper monochrome aesthetic of Ilford Pan F50. 50 means 125. F11 in Sunny 16. I think that's the look we're going for, where the buildings are off center, but hopefully balanced a bit by the shadows and the converging lines to the left. do we try and capture all that dynamism with a still frame? I think we I do not mind that photo. Problem is, it's in the shade. Two rolls down, and has it become clear why I brought this with me to Sydney? It wasn't for the pleasure of having to repack my overweight bags and carry it on the plane with me like a pack mule. In the end, what this camera gives you is image quality. I know there are many legitimate claims about digital now surpassing the quality of film, even medium format, and I'm not clinging to analog like some desperate geriatric pouring scorn on people having their face stuck in their phones and sacrificing their dignity at the altar of social media, though it's clear that the new gods of tech are turning us into a herd of mindless dancing drones. And yes, that one had to make its way to Instagram hashtagged influencers in the wild. But I digress. What medium format film gives you is a unique look. It still has everything that you love about film, but with the grain diminished just as the resolution of the photos is amped up. It's no different from how medium format digital is different from full frame, is different from micro four thirds. It's not that one is inherently better than the other, but the look of medium format film offers you that smoothness and resolution, but it also gives you a much thinner focal plane and a slower process that encourages you to think a bit differently about your photography. Perfect for those creamy out of focus areas, but this is definitely not a speed demon. There is something about medium format that creates a sense of grandeur though, and that's a wonderful thing for landscape photography, for example. Simple scenes can invoke a sense of space and airiness, but they also then invite you in to explore those little details. Of course they do, and it's because they are there. Pixel peeping is not a sin with these images. Instead, it's like finding the brush strokes in an exquisitely rendered painting. Not that you can call most of my photographic subject matter exquisite, but I do love how you can capture those details. This is just a stick on a dried up lake bed, and arguably there isn't much to see other than the stark geometry of the branch itself, but look at the detail in the bark. Notice the thin salty filaments that make the surface. It's the little things that add the magic. None of this is what we typically think about when we think about street photography, but that doesn't mean that street photographers don't care about image quality. You'll notice that when you observe street photographers in the wild, almost to a person, they're clutching their precious Leicas and wielding lenses that actually cost more than their car. And again, of course they do, because who can actually afford rent and transport when your hobby is film photography? Actually, medium format street photography does have a hallowed history. Diane Arbus and Vivian Maya all started out on Rolleiflexes, and while many of them graduated to 35mm as the format became popular, I think you'll have to admit that there are some classic cases of these photographers capturing those moments perfectly. This is a bit more imposing than a Rolleiflex and a lot noisier, but it shares a couple of things with twin lens reflex cameras, and that's the 6x6 square format and the unique perspective you get from a waist level finder. You do have to compose differently for a square aspect ratio. Rather than relying on the rule of thirds, I find myself breaking the frame straight down the middle, centering my horizon, putting the subject in the middle and stretching diagonals from corner to corner. Having the viewfinder at waist height also means that you tend to shoot lower than eye level, which gives images a unique look, sometimes looking up at the scene rather than down on it. It's a different way of viewing the world. It's also a very discreet way of shooting. I get surprisingly few people coming up to me and asking me about the camera, which is something that always happens when you're holding an antique up to your eye. In the end, all of these things contribute to a slightly different look to the images that you get from a more typical digital or 35mm perspective. And of course, the main contributor to that look is also the lens. The 75mm f2.8 is actually a great street choice. As I mentioned, it's about as simple as an optic as you can find. Not even having a focusing mechanism, this makes them ridiculously cheap for what you get, and what you get, firstly, is a very small lens. Adding this to your admittedly bulky and heavy S2 only adds a centimetre or two, and for that you get an f2.8 lens that's also very close focusing. So it's small, high quality and bright, and isn't that what you're looking for from a street photography tool? Also, don't let that 75mm fool you. This is actually quite wide angled, around 35mm focal length equivalents, though of course the square format makes it impossible to compare to the rectangular format of 35mm film. Regardless, it ticks all of those boxes. But if there is a theme to this rambling monologue, then it's that the S2 doesn't replicate the experience of shooting 35mm film, but that it's still a valid option for street photography if you're specifically looking for something a bit different and that gives you a commensurately different feel to the images. For myself, I did find that encouraged a more considered approach to street photography. Definitely not shooting from the hip, and I do have to admit that the tendency for more distant shots, as well as a general unwillingness to photograph people from the front for fear of drawing attention to myself, did make for a unique experience. One roll to go, this time a roll of Lomo 400, and we'll see if I can summon up more of a classic decisive moment. 3 rolls of film, all different film stocks, all taken on a single morning walk around Sydney and all given some consistency through the use of this Bronica S2 and its Nikon 75mm f2.8 lens. And I think we can definitively say that the Bronica S2 is a legitimate street photography tool. Is it the best choice? Well, maybe not if you're planning on doing the run and gun shoot from the hip cowboy image capture that I've covered in previous videos, both digitally and even on film with my Leica M2. This is a different style of photography, a different pace maybe, but with one salient characteristic, that it's still photography out on the streets and among the populace. That's always an uncomfortable place to be, and that's not even when I'm doing photography. Add to that the Bronica S2 as my weapon of choice for this breezy photo walk, and well, I was clearly overpacking. But I'm here and I still have my teeth, and while I might not have captured much in the way of decisive moments, I ended up with a few good shots in my pocket and a few less dollars in my wallet once I replaced the film I used up. Let's surface 6 pics from Sydney on the S2 and try to make some sense of it all. No surprises, there were lots of pictures of the backs of other people's heads, rather than a more aggressive, in-your-face approach to photography. But what do you expect bringing a bazooka to a bum fight? This kid didn't really seem to be aware of my presence, and I included this shot for a few reasons. Yes, the Australiana, but Darling Harbour is undergoing a period of redevelopment, so who knows what that view will be once the crane leaves the scene. It's always cool to capture a moment in time, even if that time is months rather than seconds. Far more fleeting was the expression on the faces of these women. That's what made me include this. I could argue that the half-obscured guy in the doorway adds a sense of mystery. It was definitely what I was going for in this shot, but I don't think either really worked well on that level, and I'm including this one because at least it's a bit less boring, even if it's a bit more cluttered. Speaking of clutter, I really do wish both these NPCs in my photography open world simulation were a little bit more to the right to fill in the gaps between the boulders rather than obscuring them. I like the poses, but this would be a bit mid, let's face it, if it weren't for the contrast between the people and the plants and all that square and rectangular geometry. I did a better job of positioning these people, or at least positioning myself. I was a bit torn here though. I nearly included this one. Falun Dafu or Falun Gong is definitely an intriguing form of meditative dance. It's hard to know why China saw it as a threat to social cohesion and banned it. Really, they should have been focusing more on narcissistic TikTokers, but then everybody between the ages of 15 and 25 would be disappeared from Shanghai's Pudong area, and who will be buying those Louis Vuitton bags? Not quite as cool as her reel, I'm sure, but that was definitely made for video. But I hope that the quiet luncheon munches here added a bit of a counterpoint to the dance moves. This one I loved mainly because it shows off the cool bokeh that this lens can create wide open from the spangly material. Ignore the other stuff in the frame, get your head out of the gutter. We are, after all, in the presence of children. And yes, I capped off this gallery with the cliched pram walking across the frame. I know, not exactly original, but the shop front details and colour were interesting, and again showed how much fun it can be to just stop and explore the little details of medium format photos. So that's your 6 for today, and you tell me if I would have been better just bringing a Ricoh GR4, which I don't have, or even just using a smaller 35mm camera. Do any of these photos evoke something in you? And I'm not talking about the chains and leather here. Rather, do you think that medium format, specifically this Bronica S2, is a legitimate street photography tool, or did I just sacrifice my back and my wallet to YouTube? Plenty more videos like this coming in 2026, so like, share and subscribe and ring that bell so that you know when another is on the way. I'm a serial dater when it comes to my cameras and film choices, so no doubt in the next one I'll be arguing that Aerochrome microfiche is the perfect medium for urban photography. Honestly though, I won't be averse to taking this one out again. It does produce a different look from my usual street pics. What these lack in immediacy, they do make up for in image quality, contemplative composition, and that juicy Vivian Maier square frame. So yes, the Bronica will have a place in my bag and my brain when I'm out seeking something a little different from the street. Later.